Welcome to the Data Strategy Show. My name's Samir Sharma and I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes. My guest today is Drew Smith. With about 20 years of experience, Drew has worked on both the business side of analytics, leveraging insights for business performance, and on the delivery side of analytics, driving the use of enterprise analytics. As the Vice President of IIA's Analytics Leadership Consortium, he engages with analytics thought leaders and top analytics practitioners in the IIA community to deliver impactful meetings and valuable content, helping to keep analytics leaders in the lead. Before joining IIA, he led the data analytics and governance team at IKEA's global headquarters in Europe. He made heavy use of analytics in various leadership roles across the IKEA value chain in both the United States and Europe. He credits his business success largely to his early and avid adoption of analytics to help drive his decisions, and is passionate about helping other organizations do the same. He received his MBA from Penn State and his undergraduate degree from Boston University. I hope you enjoy this episode, and please do share, like, and leave any comments. Thank you. Welcome, Drew Smith. Thank you so much for coming onto the Data Strategy Show. It's absolutely fantastic to have you on the show. And Drew, you are the VP of IIA's Analytics Leadership Consortium. Just what might be good is just for you to give us a little bit of your background and your journey through data.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, it's fantastic to be here, and appreciate you honoring my Christmas wishes and wearing the horns.
Yeah.
It means a lot to me that you're such an open host.
Yes,
it is great to be here indeed. It's great to meet you again. It's great to have a connection back to London, a place where I used to live. So super proud.
And not far from me.
Harrington Gardens. I actually looked it up.
Oh, you lived in Harrington Gardens. Fantastic.
Harrington Gardens. Crazy, isn't that?
Amazing. That's a stone's throw away.
Exactly. It's a small world, but I wouldn't want to paint it. So my journey to data, I've been fortunate to have a pretty long career. So I don't think I should go through the whole litany of things.
Sure. I get that.
So I'll just start when I was 3 years old.
Okay, great.
It was 1976, and America was celebrating 200 years of throwing off British rule.
Oh,
no offense, of course. And
none taken.
I start there because it was in reflection that I think the goal to find a better way might be a part of me, just inborn. And my mother, when I told her that I studied strategy in business school, and I explained to her what strategy was, she wasn't a business person. It wasn't really her purview. I said, it's the conscious making of choices to drive to the best possible outcome.
Mm-hmm.
She said, oh, that makes perfect sense, because when I told you how to tie your shoes and you found out your best friend, Matt Dolan, knew how to tie his shoes a different way, you tried both ways to see which way worked better. So the journey to data really for me has always been through the desire to find a better way. Mm-hmm. To find an interesting experimental way that might be unique. Yep. And that's actually the journey of data for me, comes straight through business. So I had owned my own business. I had worked for a small business that I had a lot of responsibility for at a young age. And even before I understood all the constructs of business, as I learned in my MBA program, even before I had any notion of how powerful Excel was, let alone other things, I always knew that there was a way to get to the ground truth.
Sure.
There was a way to evaluate options A versus option B, and figure out, how do we want to take this process? How do we want to take this initiative, whether it's a sales campaign or hourly scheduling of coworkers? So for me, the journey to data has always been through business. I've never really come about it from a conceptual level. Mm-hmm. I've come recently to really kind of have fun with the technology and think it's super cool, and be really impressed about how cloud works, and really amazed at how did someone even come up with the concept of Kubernetes and all this stuff. I think it's super cool. I love it. I'm happy to geek out on it. I'm inspired by people who know a lot more than me, which is a lot of people, frankly. But in the end, it's always, okay, great. How does that help me solve a business problem better than I could have before we had this conversation. Otherwise, it was just a cocktail conversation. It might have been interesting, but it didn't really get us anywhere. So my journey led me through, through small businesses, into an MBA program, and then into IKEA eventually, where I had a quite long career that ended up in data and analytics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get to that later. And I love that story, especially because you went from nappy to data very quickly.
You presumed I was out of nappy by now.
So listen, or I should say diaper to data, because that would be better, right?
I speak British English.
I know, but it's the D to D. You see, that was what I was trying to get to.
I got you. Yeah,
you see what I mean?
I do.
Gosh, those comedy ears. Right. So, I great story and great sort of path that led you from the business into working in this thing about analytics and, getting into data, but equally the geek side. I didn't know there was a geek side to you. So, you and I have spoken once before, and we've had a back and forth probably on email and various messages through LinkedIn. But one of the things that struck me when we spoke is you and I have probably, not probably, but we have been implementing data strategies now for the last, more than 10 years. And it's interesting for me and curious at the same time that in that space and time, I didn't really hear anybody talking about it. People used to look at me like I was a lunatic talking about data strategies and implementing data strategies, because it was very much tech driven from way back then. So now in the last couple of years, there's been this real resurgence or a renaissance of data strategy. Why do you think that is? What's changed in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's one comment I would have on that before trying to posit my opinion, you say renaissance, but I don't know that it was ever a thing so much. I think you might have been early on, and you for sure rightfully deserve credit for that. But I don't know, if I look in the rear view, that in 2005, for example, there was a big data strategy push. I think there's a few things for me about the data world that I really do enjoy, but there's also areas which I can be quite critical of. So firstly, I think strategy is difficult. It requires a lot of hard work together with different people across the organization, which is not something that data folks have shown a great capability to do.
Sure.
And data strategy has never posited itself as the magic bullet. It's always been a component piece. By definition, a data strategy is a subset maybe of an analytics strategy, or maybe even a larger organizational strategy. So it's very rightfully modest in what it tells people it can achieve. It's essential, but it's also modest. This is different than I think what a lot of our industry has fallen prey to. I mean, it started off with big data. Just get enough data and somehow you'll find your way. So there's no need for a data strategy if your whole data strategy is just volume. And then it became about the coolest, biggest tech. So whoever had the largest Hadoop cluster would win. Right? So there's been this thing where we've chased magic bullets in data, and strategies never posited itself as a magic bullet. So that's one of the reasons that the industry has sort of realized, like, okay, we have to build this out like a proper business. We need strategies, we need development approaches, we need learning and development approaches, things like data literacy. So people are starting to go, okay, we're actually a real grown-up part of the business now in this world. So we need to do grown-up business things. The other thing is, I think a lot of people maybe could be forgiven for sort of saying, yeah, intellectually that's interesting to me, but I don't know that I'm interested in it now. Because early on, especially in the retail world, which was a little bit late to the data game, frankly.
Yes, they were.
They were super early if it was Tesco and dunnhumby, or it was late. But early on, people could get so much value so quickly from data and analytics that they didn't need strategy. Like really objectively speaking, if they had 80 hours in their work week, they could fill up all 80 hours of those, putting profit to the bottom line and getting growth on the top line without quote unquote mucking around with the strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Now people have begun to harvest that. Competitive advantage through analytics is starting to sort of diminish as more people, oh, this is something I should do and I can do.
Mm-hmm.
So now the smart people are saying, okay, how do I do this in a programmatic way that scales and is sustainable, that has a point of view of what's next, right? Because I always love the allegory of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
What that forgets is eventually, after you pick off the fruit off the trees, you better have more trees.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that data strategy does is it says, okay, what is the data we have now? How do we orchestrate it? You know, how do we ingest? How do we process? How do we analyze? How do we consume? And then how do we want to do that in the future? Because the strategy is sort of those choices.
Sure.
And then the other thing I think it comes to mind, and the reason data strategy is so important right now, is people are having to make choices, right? What do I put into some sort of ML engine? And what do I make more simple? Yeah. Where do I put sort of semi R&D resources? And once you have to make choice decisions, which are definitively challenging, and they will offset each other. So something will be lost and something will be gained. That is a strategy by definition. So I think people are waking up for these reasons. They are suddenly more mature as a business unit or part of their business, rather. They are aware that the easy stuff has been done, quite frankly. So they got to start to make more conscious decisions. And then finally, I think there's also the element of the data itself. So just the sort of conceptual, constructual things is becoming simultaneously more powerful, but a little bit more complex, right? So when we had always had a bunch of BOFs, so big old flat files, you just volume, don't do anything different volume. But you're still a lot of value in BOF. There's still tons of value in transactional data, tons of value in custom data.
Huge.
But this unstructured data, there's something to that, but I can't treat it in the same way. So I've got to have a plan for how I want to manage this, both in an intake and in a consumption and ingestion and all that stuff. So I think it's probably a few people are late if you're just talking about it.
Yes, I agree.
There's some catch up that can be played.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
But I don't blame anybody for not having thought about it, say 5 years ago, because 5 years ago, life was just too easy.
It was very different. Yeah, you're right. And I found, I mean, we've been doing this now for 8 years. So we started very much in a very, very early sense when there were very few companies who would embrace it. And, and it's interesting because when I think about it, data strategy itself, and the way that you've packaged it, sometimes, I don't see, I see this blend of data and analytics coming together. Many people separate it. And I think there is separation in it as well, because you do have this thing called data and you do have this thing called analytics. One feeds the other, but the end goal, like you said earlier on, is what's the outcome? Where is that? Where are you heading? And I really like the fact that you said maybe we've grown up. Maybe a lot of data organizations within organizations have started to realize we too can't be siloed anymore. We too have to, build strategies that are going to help us for the future, but align to the overall business outcomes and objectives. So, it's interesting, but I think that segues into what, you mentioned IKEA. And I think you were there for about 17 years, right?
Yeah, I always forget the math somewhere in there.
Yeah, but you were there for a long time. And you worked across the world as well. So I think you position yourself as being on both sides of the coin, being on the business side and being on the data analytics side. So I think you started very much on the business side at IKEA, and then you ended up in a data analytics and governance role. So, what's interesting for me is as a person morphing into that role, what helped you make an impact, and what helped you drive value when you got into that data analytics and governance role at IKEA?
I think I think the business orientation, it's so overstated. This is why I would love to be original, say something brand new, no one has ever heard on Samir's Data Show, but I don't know that I will. So I'm going to let myself off the hook for that. Coming from the business side was a couple things. First off, I was quite obsessive about answering the right question for the function with whom I was working. We were early in our journey in data and analytics when I got involved on a global level at IKEA, in part because we were so successful that we didn't need to go after it, just to be frank.
Sure.
There's a few companies like that, right? I see that in some of my clients. So first thing, I was quite obsessive about that. And I was also very aware as a business person, especially someone who traveled through many different parts of the organization of, but how you actually change to make this work? I'm a little skeptical because I'm going to give you something that could point you in a direction that you really don't like. It might say that you should drop all the prices 20%, or it might say that you should eliminate these 50 suppliers who you've had for 50 years. What would happen? Would you actually do it? So I was always a little bit cynical like that.
Sure.
So the reason I think this has value is answering the right questions and then being quite clear that you will take action on that means that the few resources that you have in the data analytics world are deployed to something that is actually going to return.
Yeah.
And it's easy to say that in words. And I can tell you myself, I have messed it up. So I can share two examples, one where I got it so right and one where I got it so wrong. So coming from the business side, I mean, I understood marketing well enough, and I understood store operations in particular. When I was in the store, I was a store manager. So you have overall P&L, salary, everything, right? And then when I was in the country, we were quite aggressive in the way that we went to market. We were quite aggressive in how we understood the customer. And then when I worked in product development, I visited 250 homes over the time I was there, including spending 3 nights in a Chinese home. So we were super into how people lived. Yeah. So I had all these sort of experiences that I then said, okay, how would data make this better? So the example where I got it right was when we were working in marketing, actually, one of my favorite persons, she was such a fan of analytics. She was one of those great business leaders who comes to you and she says, I don't know what it is, but I hear you can do good things for me.
But I want more together.
Of it. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. But I could also have really honest conversations with her. So we had an idea that, like everybody does, that they're really not breaking through in some of their marketing. You have to see super low metrics in terms of email open rates and all that type of stuff.
Yes.
And at the time, we really felt like, because we had such good brand equity, the people would read our emails and go to the store if we got them the right content quickly in email, typically visually, a picture, right? So I said, okay, this is an interesting hypothesis. So you say that we have very different customers and the image matters, and we know this because of clicks and all that stuff. And we just want to get that image as close to exactly what Samir and his 9-year-old daughter want this weekend because they're going to redo her room. Then we know that Samir will get in the car, go over to Wembley or wherever you might go and pick out that furniture. So we had these ideas and I said, okay, but how do we want to work on this? Like, are you really ready for this if it's a big change? Because you're talking about going from basically people picking images to sort of computer picked images. This is the way I framed it to her. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Yeah. And she said, no, I'm not prepared for that. But I have a country that's prepared for that. And
interesting.
Okay, cool. So how would that scale? How would we take it? She said, well, the UK is really adventurous as a country and they're really admired as a marketing part. So if they next year came to our marketing conference and said, we did this and it worked, it would go like wildfire.
Right.
Okay, so that's our game plan. We test in UK and we deploy globally. So we did that. So we did a series of A/B tests in the outgoing email, and we drove direct connection between you get an email, it looks like something that you're interested in, very different in your postcode in SW7 than to someone in NW15 or whatever. And it worked, and we could prove it, and we could track it, and we could say that when we used to do it this way, we got this much people to come into the store and they paid this much, and now we have this much people and they pay this much. So we got that 100% right because we asked the question, what are you prepared to do with this information? And she gave me an honest answer and said, I'm not prepared to make the big change. In contrast, I worked together with an HR person.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only in retrospect that I made the stupidest mistakes that everybody in analytics makes. So I'll share them because so maybe people, if they've also made them, they can feel better about themselves, or maybe they can avoid it. She really wanted me to tell her that what she already knew was correct.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I didn't push hard enough to say, yeah, but
what about this?
I'm still trying not to use people's names here, but I tried. I said, I didn't push as hard as I did with the marketing person to say, yeah, but what if we find this out? So one of the things we were trying to understand is when we distribute salary increase, we tend to have a relatively narrow spread. So in other words, if there was a certain amount of money, it was spread mostly on coworkers, but it wasn't 100% narrow. It's a relatively flat organization, but still more senior people got more money. Well, we had done it different ways in different countries. So we had some good previous tests. And one of the previous tests revealed that you should give the least amount of money increase to store managers.
Okay.
You should give the most to not their direct reports, but the people under them, which is like the sort of floor managers.
Yep.
And then the people who are floor supervisors. You can debate the sort of the ethics of it, and that's fine. But from a mathematics point of view, stores that concentrated their annual increases in those zones, so higher coworker satisfaction, higher customer satisfaction, and a longer burn of growth. In other words, all stores. But these stores kind of did it for a longer time. So we did this analysis. We were very skeptical of the results. So we ran a couple of tests over a year, and it proved actually to be true. So then we went, and I said, okay, I knew I had to prepare this person. There's something counter here, but really, here's some of the stuff that we did. I didn't totally geek out on the math, And it was basically like, yeah, I'm canceling your attendance at the presentation.
Wow.
So we could not present our results.
Oh my goodness.
So then I started thinking, okay, and then I remember looking at the list of people going to the meeting. I said, okay, may I please go to the meeting? Because I just still want to understand other problems that you might have. I promise to keep my mouth shut. Won't tell you that you shouldn't give your salary increase to store managers. You should give it to a couple others.
Yeah.
So keep your mouth shut. I trust you. Come in. Remember looking at the invitation list, and I remember going, okay, that person used to be a store manager. That person used to be a store manager. That person. I was like, oh, I'm such a moron.
Yeah.
Because I was basically telling them, hi, I'm here to tell you and give you mathematical evidence that you don't matter.
Yes, exactly.
And all these great things for which you've been rewarded, for why you've gotten a promotion into the big corporate headquarters. Yeah, it wasn't you.
Well,
it was.
But there is a whole raft of other people below you that actually that are the ones that and you and I know that is what leadership is about, right?
Right.
So
I think for me, that was like the crystallizing lesson. Like everyone always says it, get the question right, get the right question. Totally agree, 100%. Also know, and you have to, unfortunately, as a leader in analytics, develop this skill set or develop it within your team or within your ecosystem. Know sort of roughly the realm of possibilities.
Yes.
So we knew with marketing, the possibility was this could push us towards like super automation, in which case like a third of the staff would have to find different things to do.
Yeah.
Are you ready for that? She
that?
said,
no,
I'm not ready for that. Cool. And then the other one, we did know it was in the realm of possibility that there would be a totally different, radically changed allocation of how performance bonus money is spent. Are you prepared for that? And I think that if I had asked that HR person that question, she would have been honest and said, no, I'm not prepared.
Right. Yeah.
It's on me.
Yes. It's not on her. Yeah.
So that skill set where you get the right question and then you understand what you might do with it in order to sort of hypothesize whether you should continue is fundamental. And I only know that, I think, as well as I do from making the mistakes and from having been in so many parts of the business.
And I think there's a great examples because, early on, we had a lot of, I think the most use cases were probably in marketing. They were ready to take the risks a little bit more than others because they, let's face it, had always worked within the context of data and understanding campaigns and at least measuring to a certain extent. Not, you know, I remember working in strategic marketing a long time ago and seeing the, let's just say, going from a very spray, what we used to call, and you know, spray and pray, to this is really based on now where we've segmented, understood interest, really got to understand those clients and the depth of what they're trying to do. So I think that was easier. What I also like is the fact that, you know, you are asking what risk they are willing to take, but equally you give them different outcomes. Which I believe isn't really done as much as it should be. I don't think the essence, we're always just trying to get to an answer and get to that answer quickly, whereas you could go to the business person and say, well, look, if you did this, this may happen. And if you did this, you might have to do these various things, and this might be the impact. And we've also looked at what might be the impact if you did this. So I think giving them one or two variations is really interesting. But I think as data people, largely what I've seen is that it's always just a, here it is, this is my assumption and this is my hypothesis, and we've answered the question, but have you really? You know, I think that's what you're telling me. You really went against it and looked at it in a very pragmatic manner, rather than just trusting the data in a way that was, you know, implicit. You did push that barrier and say, okay, well, can we go a little bit further? Because I think we can really make an impact. And obviously in the HR context, you didn't get it right, but you know, you learn, and
yeah,
and that's what I like, the fact that you've, you know, you hit yourself on there and said, look, why did I do that? You know, it was a bit crazy. I should have kind of asked that question. So
after the fact. Oh,
yes. Well, I didn't want to do that because I might dislodge my ears.
No, you cannot do that.
I didn't, you know.
Quite sad.
I think my daughter would be really disappointed if they fell off.
But it comes to this sort of also, I would bet, and I'm sure, given the smarts of the folks in your audience, that I probably broke some rules, because I probably opened the door up to technical things like affirmation bias and confirmation bias. I probably did.
Right.
But the moments that mattered really were those moments where, again, when I got it right in marketing, it wasn't a straight linear conversation. Robotically, would you do X? I would not do X. Would you do X minus 1? I would not do X minus 1. It was like, hey, look, what happens? Like, let's have this coffee. Like, what happened? Oof, I'm not sure we're ready for that, because we haven't done as much testing, and you know, not everyone really understands how this works, and the math isn't really there. So like, could we do it another way? Yeah, let me think about that. I mean, I suppose we could do it in a country. Oh, I have a country for you. Yeah. Like, that's kind of how it works. Everyone wants to think it's sort of like super, but it is take this, we're in this together. Let's figure it out together. Let's find a way that works for you and works for me, grows the organizational capability in a massive way, and pushes people. We need to push people, but we don't need to, you can get to the point where you push people so much that you push them away. And in analytics, sometimes we do that. We do it when we out on the technique, and we tell people that if they don't understand how machine learning works, then their job is going to be gone in 3 years, and you know, they're going to be on the unemployment line. Like, we need to kind of be like, okay, we're in this together. Like, this is a problem we need to solve. We need to be more efficient with our marketing money. We owe our customers, who in the case of IKEA says, create a better everyday life for the many. If you don't actually know what that everyday life looks like, that's a hopeless thing to achieve. But through a little bit of testing, you get these images that prove, well, this is what your everyday life challenge is. You can make that connection.
I think you're right, and I think the whole business partnering, test and it, you know, the sort of testing and learning, iteration, even you know, getting the peer review for people to query what you're doing. I don't see that much, you know, and I think that's really interesting for me, from, just sitting there and sort of saying to the data scientist or whoever might have done it, hey, listen, can we just walk through it? Tell me, break it down in steps that I will understand, but I'm going to ask you some really difficult questions. So you better, you really need to be transparent in the way that this black box or whatever has been done. So I think there's that bit as well, because what you just said is the fact that there is a certain element of, I'm going to tell you about my model because I'm so cool at building algorithms. As a business person, do they really care? Not really, but I think both need to understand the capabilities, and you're right about that. They do need to stretch themselves.
Yeah.
I think there's an element of that, and this is a good segue actually into the thought that's been coming. You recently wrote an article on LinkedIn, and it was about closing the growing gap in analytics. That's the way you and I think your idea was that, I think your thesis was that there's a growing gap between the business and analytics. So tell me a little bit more about that gap, because that's what we your examples have driven us to that point. So that was in IKEA, but is it getting worse? And what do we need to do to close that gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting worse. Very, very transparently, it's getting worse. But let's talk about why, because it's a totally fixable, right?
Yeah.
And we were early. I was early in for IKEA. I was early in analytics, so we grew quickly, and so that gap grew quickly. But what I am judging and what I've written that blog on, which is the start of a series, is based on my client interactions as well. I hear this from my clients when I hear things like, we have this model and the business doesn't understand it, or the business won't use it. And I hear this in all industries. I hear it in healthcare providers and manufacturing and CPG. It's amazing how consistent it is. And my central thesis is that because it became apparent that this was a way, analytics was a way to drive competitive advantage. And because I am a believer in capitalism, I think it needs to change the way it delivers value to society. But by and large, money goes to the place where money can grow. Mm-hmm. So analytics was a place where businesses could grow their money.
Yes.
So they put money into analytics.
Yeah.
And this means that we got massive technological developments. It means that we went and hired really smart people with PhDs who'd been doing statistical models that were invented in the 40s.
Yeah.
And now they're able to do them in computers at amazing scale and speed. This sort of created this trajectory of knowledge and ability that just theoretically just kept climbing and climbing.
Yeah.
I think, the Netflix prize was a big challenge, and then architect it, and then 2 years later you could turn it on like a light switch. Amazing stuff. So people started to invest in data teams, they started to invest in data infrastructure, but business really, to my HR point, hadn't really absorbed it in a way to say, this is such powerful stuff, I will transform totally how I work.
Right.
I never, ever, ever heard a business person say that. Sorry, I didn't. Maybe I'm ill-informed, but I doubt it. So the gap came because this theoretical capability grew and grew and grew. And analytics people became more and more convinced about how powerful it could be. And they became distanced from their business folks who sort of didn't understand it well enough to go, I don't get what you're on about.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? Why does the cloud matter to a supply chain manager? A woman who's built started from the ground up and ran a warehouse and built a distribution center and then built a network. Like, why does she care whether the data sits in a room behind her or in a third-party facility down the road? She doesn't care. No. Like, it's really not as impressive as you think to her. But if you say, because it's not on where you are behind you, I can put it in a better system, and we can actually get you faster answers to where the products are. That she cares about.
Yes.
That she's really, now you've got her attention.
Yeah.
So I challenge both the analytics leader to make their solutions more relevant to the people who will actually implement those solutions. So I needed to make my HR model more relevant to the person who would actually change the way incentives work in the store. And
Yes.
And I also, because come from the business, I feel I have standing, if I say it like that, I have standing to be critical of business leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
business leaders, and here I'll challenge you a little bit, just I think it's a small tweak, right? No, I think business leaders should understand a little bit some of the small differences between algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why. If I'm working with an analytics leader as a business leader and he's super smart and he knows all these cool algorithms,
Yep.
I don't really want to geek out whether it's like exactly naive Bayes or neural network, but I do want to be able to have a conversation which says, I'm willing to trade off some complexity,
Sure.
some opacity
Mm-hmm.
for a more powerful answer.
Right.
Okay, good. Then I'm going to give you a neural network thing. I'm not going to be able to explain it well, but it's fine. Or I'm going to go something much more simple because you're going to need to take it to your stakeholders. You're going to need to explain why a change in this activity, which is an independent variable, creates a better outcome, which is our dependent variable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So business leaders don't need to know all the nitty gritty of how that works, right? But to be able to have a conversation with their analytics leader and say, yeah, I accept the trade-off of complexity for simplicity. I accept the trade-off of more data, more computation power, which is going to drive current cost and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
I don't accept that. I need it quick. I'm willing to invest in long.
Yeah.
These conversations, I do put business leaders on the hook. So in that way that the capability grows and the business capability also
grows. I think I get that. What I think I'm not expecting a business leader to understand, and I think that's the depth of it, the nitty gritties, do I really care about the algorithm of k-means clustering and getting down into the feature engineering and really the building the mechanics of it? No, I don't. But I think it's the definition. I think if you're able as an analytics individual, even if it's just explaining why you are going towards this neural network versus a classification algorithm or whatever it might be, then you should be able to nuance it in such a way that, as you said, here's the business benefit for you doing that, or here's the disbenefit for you doing that. So I think that's the language that needs to change between these two. And I think, one thing that I'll also add to the fact that, the analytics teams were going way away from the business teams. And I think there's a level of ego.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I think that's really bad that we've come to that point, because what's happened is that these business teams are saying, well, hang on, who the hell are you to tell me? And, and in some cases they're saying, well, I'm not going to listen to you because you know what? I'm going to get my own analysts. I'm going to bring them in. And actually and they are trained in the business and they're going to be able to do this stuff. So I think, from that perspective, I agree with you that there is a certain level that we should be challenged with as business people, and I think it's still going to be it's still going to take time. We've got to get out of the analytics people have got to get out of their heads.
Yes,
right.
I 100% agree, and I think you're touching on one of my great fears, and the reason I am interested in this conversation is if we do not manage to strengthen the connection between analytics and business, and you go, and this is true, we've seen this actually, if you have this sort of unhealthy divorce, so we got married, we fought all the time, you never put the cap back on the toothpaste, and I'm gone, right? If we have this unhealthy divorce, what will happen is functional analytics by definition will not manage some of the most important stuff in infrastructure underlying that.
Yes.
We talked about data strategy at one point.
Yeah.
There's no marketing data strategy. And then you don't just take that piece of paper and add it to the piece of paper called supply chain analytics strategy.
No, you've got to integrate it. Yeah, you've got to integrate it. You've got to understand the holistic view of it. And that's the thing. I think that's what you're saying there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we don't fix it now, I am worried that we're going to get there. One small thing I always find, maybe you might, since we've been at this game for a little while, I think it's worth us analytics geeks and business geeks reflecting on. I remember back in the day when I was just an Excel junkie, running Excel for really senior business leaders. So this is in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? It's just, I remember there were a cadre of business leaders who wouldn't even learn how to use an Excel filter.
Okay. Yeah.
So I feel like when I think about what I hear business leaders be dismissive about with algorithms or whatever, that does touch that sensitivity in me. Are we back to not learning how to use a filter? And because filters and algorithms are for lower level people, I'm a senior. I don't do that. I've got a special parking spot.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the ego is definitely there on the analytics side,
Oh.
but business leaders also need to ask themselves if it's there as well.
I think it probably is in the context of, you know, the way that both have come at it, because, you know, we've got to look at it in simple terms. Analytics has promised a lot.
Yes.
Has it delivered? Probably not as much. So that's the intensity by which the business people are kind of, you know, they're sort of standing there and saying, we did put a lot of, you know, emphasis on this. We gave you lots of money. You pumped it into tech. You bought in these guys called data scientists. You went and got the best PhDs. Where's the value? You know, so, and I get your point around, you know, I get it. I've been there in that situation. So, yeah. And so, okay. You know, you said we can get there. So how do we get there?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think our time is up. I gotta. No, just kidding. Again, I'll go back to so the first thing is to recognize the way we get there is messy.
Yeah.
What I mean by this is it is the constant human interaction. It is it is the involvement of analytics people in the business all the time. I remember I was speaking to one of our common good friends, Kathleen Maley.
Yep.
And we were debating organizational structures, and it actually turned out that we much agreed. And what she said was, I liked the way she framed it. So she had her analytics team members sat with business leaders, and the way she made it clear how important that relationship was, she said, you don't need to ask me which meeting to go to if there's a conflict between the meeting I invite you to and the one your business leader invites you. You go to the business leader. So from an analytics leader, Kathleen and her was sending a signal to her team about how important that was. Absolutely essential.
Yep.
It is, and you don't have to change your structure, but you have to change your mindset in that sort of framework. So I think that is tremendously important. I have value for programs like data literacy when they're put in the right context.
Sure.
Not when they're put in okay, we're going to educate all business leaders on statistics and therefore everything will be fixed. We're going to give everybody a glossary so they can always just look up what a K means. No, that's not okay. When you recognize that it is a part of a change where you say we need to become better at using data. In order to become better at using data, we need to better understand data.
Yep.
And we need to understand how it applies to business. So I think the way we get there is by people being conscious and implementing those types of programs.
Correct.
With a business focus, always taking the learning in context. I mean, we do a lot of L&D as a result of the work that we do at the IIA, and it's never, you should never forget that adults learn by doing. Everybody learns by doing.
Sure.
Frankly.
Yeah, they do.
But don't disconnect the change you're trying to make from those moments. So that moment with marketing where we said, okay, what did we do different? And then going back to my marketing partner said, this is what we do different. How do I explain this to your global team? Because if I go and geek out around this
no one's going to listen.
Or this algorithm, I know it won't work. And I think I have some ideas, but help me. And then she says, okay, I think I now even more understand what you did. Thank you for that. And here's how I would twist that around. Same thing with supply chain. We did some work with supply chain. Okay, this is great. Can you take this up a level so that I can get my supply chain people to think if this worked in this part of the supply chain, it could work faster. So you have to be very, very conscious that you're doing these activities, which are analytics products, and the outcome of them is a better decision. And then you have to take a story backwards about how you came to that decision, and you spread that story.
Sure.
So I think the short answer to your question is continuous, planned, and spontaneous engagement with business people around how you now do something different, and how that different is better.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think there is a magic bullet. And
I,
the other thing,
yeah.
Samir, to 100% you agree. Stop overselling stuff. Stop it. Stop pretending that the sentient robots are coming. They're not coming.
Yes. Yeah.
Stop pretending that the cloud is a low-cost solution, which people first posited.
Yeah. No.
Like, stop with the nonsense about the next big thing being the thing. We've talked about the next big thing in analytics since analytics has started. We've talked about
absolutely. Yeah.
as the savior person. We've talked about, so stop it. Just stop. Like, analytics leaders, I don't have any more like super smart guys on that. Just you take responsibility to tamp that down when one of your geeks comes in and says, Kubernetes is all we should do everything in Kubernetes. Okay. Love your enthusiasm. Fantastic. Tell me more about how you learned about this technology. Wonderful. You've talked about how important it is and what it can do. Focus on what it can do.
Yep. Yeah.
It's even a weird name.
Agreed. No, well, yeah, but I mean, the essence is just that. I think you're absolutely right. We got to get back to basics. Got to be simple in our approach. Yes, there's so many wonderful things out there that you could use, but you don't need all of them, and you don't need to espouse, the fact that you go to your business partner and say, we're going to do AI. If I was a business partner, I'd be saying, what do you mean? But the problem is now everybody's talking about AI as if it's going to, as you said, the robots are going to come and suddenly I'm going to be, either out of a job or, I don't know, I'm going to be turned into a drone. I have no idea, but, whatever it might be. So, let's slightly change tack in terms of, we've talked about closing the gap. I think that's something that we will watch and be clear about, because I think you and I absolutely agree on that, explicitly. You've been working in supply chain analytics for a pretty long time, in a retail background, and we've seen, the year that's coming to an end. We know exactly where we've been. It's been a pretty rough year for retailers, we talked about data strategies, but what kind of data strategy advice would you give to retailers who are coming out of 2020, going into 2021 and thinking, we're emerging from a pretty bad time of it? Hopefully they've thought about it, but if they haven't thought about it, what advice would you give them to emerge and to come out of 2020 into 2021, which has disrupted them completely? How would you get them back on track, thinking about their revenues and thinking how data analytics is really going to help them next year? What are the top three things that you would advocate for?
Yeah, so it is an industry that I know a lot about and that I really like. It's also an industry super interesting to talk to everybody, because everybody has a retail experience that is so
visceral,
tangible, right?
Yeah.
So I think the first guidance I always give in retail is, in regards to 2020 is, quoting, of course, your former PM, which would be Winston Churchill, which is never waste a good crisis, right? This is a crisis. You were maybe ill prepared or well prepared, but you certainly weren't aware that this was going to happen. So, and in particular, have the mindset that you've never known more about your organization than you do today. From two vectors. First off, every weakness you ever had has been exposed, and it sucked. Oh, it was raw and it hurt and it was painful, but now you know. So every weakness from a business model point of view has been exposed. Your inability to drive in-store pickup, your inability to connect your systems, whether they are from a distribution center disconnected from a retail footprint, which happens, right? So you've never known more. Do not waste that knowledge. Don't be fearful of looking back because it was painful. Park that in a big virtual piece of paper because it's super important. At the same time, you have never had the customer giving you more direct feedback on what is working and what is not.
Yes.
Because there's something tremendously energizing about working on a retail sales floor. The big Saturdays we used to have at IKEA were so much fun. I mean, you opened the doors and people ran past you, and then you went home some 12 hours later, just completely knackered. But you looked at the till and you said, we had a great day.
Yep.
So those are truly energizing, but you couldn't absorb that feedback. But now, everything being done digitally, you can absorb that feedback.
Yes,
so right now, step number one is take advantage of all of these bits of knowledge that you have. And any strategy is, where are you now? Where do you want to be? And how do you want to get there? So that's what you want to do. Then what you really need to do is move quickly into prioritization. Which exposed weaknesses, which new novel data insights are the most actionable for 2021? If I were a retailer right now, I would not be planning more than 6 months in advance.
Sure.
Because you and I think probably pre-recording, I don't really recall, we talked about how will this inoculation, these
vaccines,
thank you. How will they and when will they kick in? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
So as a retailer, so pick those 2 or 3 things that are most exposed weaknesses and most insightful data, especially when those 2 line up. When frustration around pickup points lines up with what you know is a lost sale because you've had a drop basket or you've had a cancel or you've had a return. So connect those 2. Then look at a re-engineering of your system. This is such an amazing thing. This is what I tell my supply chain friends, especially. It's like, this is awesome. Like, you have never had the slate wiped clean in supply chain.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So take this rare opportunity for a clean slate. I mean, supply chain developed iteratively over time. It went from, distribution centers, and then the era of big box retailers, and then, the era of Amazon. Like, it developed over time, just slightly pivoting and tweaking and evolving. But now you've got a clean slate. So what are those operations where if you change them, you solve a customer pain point, a coworker frustration, and what is this new novel data source around which you can architect your process? Because if we're honest, one of the big struggles that people should always remember in data, one of the reasons it's hard to work with data and analytics is the data was never meant for analytics.
Yes.
It wasn't. It was meant to record the till, or it was meant to send a package to somebody. But London postcodes are not analytics friendly.
Yeah.
They're alphanumeric. There's space in the middle. They make geographical sense, because I know if I'm an SW5 and I need to get to SW7, I could walk 2 miles, right? But you need to sort of take this amazing opportunity that you have to sort of reconstruct your processes in line with your data process. And that goes back to the data strategy thing. So now I've got my data strategy. I either have one or I don't have one, but I have key inputs, which are this business transformation to meet my customer pain points. And this is where, if you want to allow your data geek flag to fly, you can, because I think data folks, and I'm talking more data than analytics folks, but mostly data and analytics. Data folks might need to stretch themselves to explain to their business stakeholder why this new novel data source is so good.
Yes.
Sometimes it's not so intuitive. I mean, IoT gets a lot of buzz, or spatial data gets a lot of buzz.
Yeah.
But stretch yourself to find how that new novel data source and that new way of orchestrating your supply chain are a really, really good marriage. And I think it's a great. So take opportunity to look at the pain you've had, look at the data points that show that failure. Really look at architecting from a fresh slate, and take the opportunity actually to align your data and your new supply chain structure all at the same time.
Brilliant.
knock on, I really honestly hope it never happens again, because I don't really want another 20 in my lifetime.
No, I don't think any of us do.
So let's assume it never happens again and don't waste the opportunity.
Yep. Yep. Thank you so much. That's been fantastic. I love those 3 reference points for retailers. Drew Smith, I'm going to thank you so much for coming onto the show. I've had a fantastic time speaking to you, and wish you all the best of luck at IIA. And where actually can, where can people reach you?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Samir. So you can reach me at D Smith. I've got a really hard last name. It's Smith. So D as in David, but D as in Drew, Smith at iianalytics.com.
Great.
And you can also just go on to iianalytics.com, where you can find the blog that Samir referenced.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you're connected to Samir, you might well be connected to me. And if we aren't already, please reach out and connect to me via LinkedIn as well.
Perfect.
But Samir, it's been fantastic. I really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure.
Congratulate your daughter on her success of getting you to wear your antler horn.
Yeah, look at those.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you hear the bells?
Nah, it's okay. I trust you. Good father award for Samir.
She's going to walk in a minute and have a look. No doubt. I'm sure she's going to be saying,
good.
You did it. Okay. Well, thank you so much.